In the snow-covered wooden house outside, the dim light from the flickering fire illuminated the face of the Viking chief. He stepped forward, carrying an ancient shield, the wood surface carved with faded patterns of time. He placed the shield in front of you, his voice deep and warm. This shield has kept the mark of many generations of warriors. If you carve your name on the shield with a message, to prove that you have not only heard the story, but have also entered the Viking path. Follow, so that your name echoes in the adventures that follow. Then you will not be alone. You bend down, imagining your hand carving on the cold wood. The heavy door swings open, and the winter wind rushes in, carrying the scent of snow, pine, and the distant howling of wolves. The shield is in your hand. The journey begins. The wooden house is warm. The firelight shines on the cold ground. The sound of firewood crackling, mixed with the sound of the wind whistling outside. A simple breakfast, hard bread, hot barley porridge, some dried fish. You put on your fur coat, open the door, and step outside. Snow covers the whole village. In the distance is a glacier quietly flowing. The mountains are covered in white. The village gradually woke up. From the wooden house next door, children's voices rang out clear, like crystal falling on the icy ground. A little boy ran out the door, his bare feet stepping on the snow, then quickly pulled back in, laughing and screaming from the cold. The laughter echoed far and wide, as if softening the harshness of winter. Strollmen began to leave their houses. They wore thick cloaks, shouldered axes and shovels, preparing for a day of work. Some went into the forest to chop more firewood. The sound of the axes hitting the dry tree trunks rang out crisply, echoing in the quiet space. Each blow of the axe was like a drum beat, keeping the rhythm of life for the whole village. The women lit more fires. The smell of baking barley bread gradually spread in the air, fragrant, mixed with the smell of smoke, creating a rustic yet familiar flavor. Some people sit weaving wool, their hands deftly weaving each loop of thread, each stitch, as if weaving through time, keeping the winter from being too long. In the small square in the middle of the village, some young men were practicing. They held wooden shields and wooden swords, clanging against each other. The laughter rang out, not of battle but of youth and vitality. Each blow, each step, left strong marks on the snow, leaving a long-lasting echo in the minds of the observers. Further away, in the cattle pen, the sounds of cows and goats mixed together. An old man was spreading hay, humming an old song. The melody was rustic, the words unclear, but humming, steady, like a spell that kept winter from swallowing people. You walked along the hard-paved road, covered with white snow. Under your feet, the snow rustled. Above your head, smoke from the kitchen lingered in the cold air. On both sides of the road, friendly eyes looked at you, nodding, greeting. No need for many words. Just a look was enough to say, "We are together here, in this winter." The village is small, but resilient. Beneath the harsh cold lies a warm, enduring rhythm of life, like the fire that never goes out in the hearth of each house. And you, in this place, feel like you are not just an outsider, but part of the community, of the ongoing Viking story. After a simple but satisfying breakfast, you put on your thick cloak, picked up the wooden shield that had accompanied you for many winters, and walked out to the village training ground. The sky was brighter now, but the sunlight was still pale and weak, like a thin silver cloth covering the landscape. On the wide ground, covered with a thick layer of snow, the footprints were crisscrossed, proof of many generations who had trained here. The wooden stakes were driven deep into the ground, lined up neatly, looking like invisible enemies, waiting. The sound of axes cutting into wood, the sound of swords hitting shields, echoed. Each sound was sharp, echoing from the distant cliffs, making the whole space seem to resonate with the melody of power. The old village trainer, with silver hair and eyes as deep as ice lakes, stood in the middle of the field. His voice was deep and steady, not urgent, but like the sound of waves that never stopped. A Viking warrior is not only strong in his arms, true strength lies in his heartbeat, in his breathing. If your heart is too fast, you will be impatient. If your breathing is disordered, you will fall before your enemy can even touch you. You gripped the wooden sword tightly. Your cold hands trembled, but your heartbeat gradually matched the sound of his voice. You raised your shield, slowly stepping forward. Boom! A blow hit your shield. Your whole arm shook. Your shoulder felt heavy as if it had been hit by a hammer. But it was just a test. You kept your balance, breathing deeply. The smell of burning wood from the fire still lingering on your cloak, reminding you of where you belonged. You turned around, returning the blow. Shield hit shield. Sword hit sword. The sound was not fierce, but deep, resonant, like the beat of a festival drum. With each collision, the cold air seemed to melt a little, giving way to the heat from the blood, flowing strongly through the veins. The other young men were also practicing enthusiastically. The shouts and laughter mixed together, making the training ground a lively, energetic scene. Some fell into the snow. 10 competed up laughing loudly, brushing off the snow stuck to their beards. Some sweat ran down, forming cold streaks on their cheeks, but their eyes were as bright as fire. The old trainer nodded slightly. He didn't need to say more. Just one look was enough for you to understand. Every hit today was a step in preparation for tomorrow. As the sun rose a little higher, the group of friends and a few other warriors entered the forest surrounding the village. This was not just a practice session, but also a hunt. In the harsh winter, hunting was a way to sustain life, meat to eat, skin to keep warm, and training for real battles. The path into the forest was silent. The sound of footsteps on the snow echoed, lingering like a repetitive song. Each person's breath came out in wisps of smoke, mingling with each other, fading away with the wind. The forest was deep and quiet, so quiet that you could hear the snow falling from the pine branches to the ground. The smell of pine resin, cold earth, and the pungent scent of moss mixed together, thick in the air. You held your wooden bow tightly. The string was tight, cool to the touch of your fingers. Each step was a calculation. Placing your feet lightly, holding your breath slowly. In the distance, a deer appeared. Its brown and white fur stands out against the snow. Its ears are raised, its eyes bright and alert. It stops by a tree, bends down to sniff the ground. The group stops immediately. No one signals, but absolute silence is the common language. You kneel, the arrow is drawn. Time seems to stand still. You hear your heart beating, not fast, but slow, deep. As the old trainer told you, your fingers release. A whoosh sound is heard. The arrow flies, piercing the still air. Then, slap, the deer falls. The white snow is streaked with red. The forest is still, as if accepting this sacrifice as an inevitable part of the cycle of life. You move closer. The animal's breathing slows. Its eyes look at you. No blame, no fear, just a calm look. As if accepting its fate, you bow slightly, whispering a thank you. Because the Vikings believe that every fallen creature gave away a part of its strength to sustain the life of the community. The deer's body was placed on a wooden stretcher, and they carried it back to the village together. The sky was now clearer. The sun was brighter. The pale yellow sunlight spread on the snow, reflecting and sparkling like 1,000 small gems. You turned back to look at the deep forest. The dark shadows of the trees stood still, as if witnessing, as if keeping the memory of this hunt. A memory that was both solemn and sacred. The north wind whistled through the ravine, carrying a biting cold. The sky was gray, heavy clouds pressing down on the valley. The sun was nowhere to be seen, leaving only a faint glow, like a fire hidden by a thick layer of ash. The village elders had said, "It will not be a peaceful day." And sure enough, the news came from a distant watchtower. A group of northern raiders were approaching, crossing the glacier to find a way to attack. The Vikings gathered at the edge of the forest, facing the white expanse of ice. The ice was thin in places, and everyone knew that one wrong step could send a man plunging into the dark. Cold water, like a knife blade. You stood in the middle of the ranks, your hands clutching your wooden shields. The old trainer's words echoing in your head. Deep breath, slow heart, listening ears. Just this, you will survive. The clanking of metal rang as people adjusted their belts, sharpened their swords. No one spoke much. The sound of wind and the crunch of leather on snow replaced the conversation. A black raven flew across the sky, cawing hoarsely. The Vikings believed it was a sign from Odin, the god of war and knowledge. The group clenched their weapons. There was no turning back. The glacier stretched out before you, like a giant mirror. The blue ice beneath your feet was transparent, with tiny cracks visible, like spider webs. Under the ice, the water flowed, dark and deep, like an abyss that would swallow anyone who was careless. Every step was a challenge. The hobnailed boots slid lightly on the ice, making a screeching sound. Shadows of people were reflected in the ice, swaying as if their own souls were accompanying them. The air was thick with tension. You could hear your own heartbeat, not fast, but heavy, echoing in your chest like a drum. The drumming mingled with the howling wind, creating a strange melody, both encouraging and threatening. 10 from afar figures appeared, a long line, black cloaks fluttering in the wind. It was the northern bandits. There were many of them, their eyes gleaming, their swords reflecting the gray light. Their shouts echoed, reverberating across the ice, rumbling like thunder. The battle cry rang out. Both sides charged. The ice shook under the weight of dozens of bodies. Shields clashed with shields. Swords clashed with axes. The deafening sound filled the air. Each blow was a crisp explosion, reverberating through the ice, echoing from the distant cliffs. You raised your shield, parried an axe strike. The force was so strong that your arm went numb. But you gritted your teeth, spun around, and pushed the enemy back. Your sword blade swung, a silver light flashing in the gray sky. Bang! The ice cracked. A long crack opened near your feet. Cold water splashed up, soaking your shoes. A scream rang out. A bandit slipped, fell, and was swept away by the black water in an instant. No one stopped. The fight continued. You slid on the ice, the toes of your shoes gripping tightly, and you lunged forward, your shield slamming into your opponent's chest. He fell, his head hitting the ice. A dry clop sound rang out. Then silence. All around, screams mixed with the clanging of metal. The smell of blood wafted in the wind, mixed with the cold smell of ice, strong and heavy. The battle gradually turned into chaos. The ice cracked everywhere, small cracks spreading quickly into long, winding lines like snakes. Every time someone fell, the cracking sound echoed, threatening to swallow the entire battlefield. A warrior beside you was hit. Crimson blood stained his wool fur coat. He still laughed, shouting, "For the village, for the gods!" Then rushed forward, parried a blade, felling the enemy before he himself fell. You didn't have time to think. Every action became a reflex. Dodge, block, stab, spin. Your breath was hot and rapid, steaming in the cold air. Then you saw a huge enemy, 1.5 times taller than a normal man. Step forward. He swung his giant axe. The wind howled. You raised your shield. Boom. Your whole body shook. The shield cracked open. Splinters of wood flew everywhere. You backed away, your heart pounding like a war drum. But then, in a flash, you remember what your teacher said. Strength lies not in the weapon, but in the calm. You duck. Dodging another strike, the axe sinks deeper into the ice, creating another large crack. You turn, gathering all your strength, and stab the tip of your sword into the gap between the armor. Blood sprays bright red on the white ice. He screams, staggers, and falls, creating a deep gash. After hours of tension, the sound of swords and axes gradually faded. The survivors of the bandits fled, disappearing into the misty snow. The ice was now streaked with red blood, the long cracks still groaning and cracking, as if the glacier itself had grown tired of witnessing the violence. You stood panting, shield broken in hand, sword stained with blood. The cold wind blew through your hair, through your clothes, but you no longer felt cold. In your heart, there was only the sound of your heartbeat, a slow, deep, steady beat, like a distant drumbeat from ancient times. The group gathered, carrying the wounded, walking slowly back. Under the gray sky, the shadows of the warriors were cast long on the ice, tilted, wavering like souls. Victory was not loud. It was quiet, permeating your breath, your eyes, each heavy but proud step. After the battle on the glacier, the Viking warriors walked back through the snow-covered forest, heavy footsteps, howling wind, and occasionally the short cries of the wounded. The village appeared in the dim afternoon light. Blue smoke rose from the thatched roofs, blending with the gray sky, like a thin blanket covering the landscape. The elderly, women, and children rushed out. They watched silently, then burst into tears, calls, and cheers. A mother hugged her son who had just returned, blood still staining his shirt. Her hands were trembling, but her eyes were bright. A girl gave her lover a long, deep look, enough to say 1,000 words. The long horn sounded, echoing throughout the valley. It was the signal. We have won. We will celebrate. The whole village joined hands to prepare. Tonight, no one slept. In the great kitchen of the synagogue, a fire was burning. The flames cast a golden light on the faces of the Viking women who were working tirelessly. They hung huge chunks of wild boar on racks, skewered with large wooden sticks, and turned them over the fire. The sound of fat dripping onto the hot coals sizzled, and the aroma rose, spreading throughout the house. Huge copper pots were placed right on the stove, in which a thick soup of barley, beans, and stewed bones was boiling. Outside in the yard, men were butchering giant salmon that had just been pulled from the river. They washed it with snow, rubbed it with salt, and roasted it on flat stones that were red hot. Black bread was rebaked, hot, crispy on the outside, fragrant with barley inside. Jars of honey beer were rolled out from the cellar, golden, thick, sweet, and rich. Laughter rang out, alternating with the sound of knives and chopping boards, the crackling of wood in the oven. The atmosphere was bustling, spreading to every corner. Children ran around, holding bundles of green pine, sticking them into the cracks of the wooden walls. The smell of fresh pine resin filled the air, giving a fresh feeling. People erected more wooden poles around the square, hanging on them bright red, green, and yellow claws, spoils from long trips. From afar, the village lit up like a fire in the middle of a sea of white snow. Musicians took out lyres, hand drums, and wine horns to use as trumpets. The strings of the lyres hummed. The drums beat rapidly. The horns resounded. Each sound seemed to blend together, vibrating the air, making the whole mountain and forest listen. As the sky darkened, the Viking village became a vivid picture. In the middle of the square, a giant fire was lit. Logs as big as a man's arm were piled up, burning red hot, rising into a towering column of light. Sparks flew out, swirling into the night sky, as if to challenge the pitch-black darkness that was surrounding them. Around the fire, long oak tables were set up in rows. On the tablets trays of golden grilled meat, fragrant salmon, hot bread, and jars of honey beer were placed close together. The elderly sat in the front seats. The warriors stood behind. The children ran around, all blended together, like a giant family. The sound of hand drums played a slow rhythm. The sound of lyres joined in, sometimes high-pitched, sometimes melodious, like the wind blowing through the mountain pass. The whole village gradually quieted down. They knew. Before celebrating, they had to thank the gods. An old man with a long beard, a fur cloak, and a ceremonial staff in his hand stepped out. It was the priest, the intermediary between the gods and the people. He raised a horn of mead, his voice deep and resonant. Odin, father of all warriors, please witness our strength and loyalty. O Thor, god of thunder, please give us strength to protect this roof. O Freya, goddess of love, please keep the fire in our hearts warm. Everyone raised their hands and shouted. The shout echoed off the cliffs far away, mixed with the sound of wind and fire. After the prayer, the priest poured mead on the ground, an offering to Mother Earth, and threw some of it onto the fire, an offering to the sky god. The fire flared up fiercely, as if accepting. The whole village cheered. The feast had officially begun. The sound of wooden bowls hitting each other, the sound of wine horns clinking together, cheers filled the air. The warriors ate the grilled meat with their hands, the fat dripping down their fingers, but no one cared. They laughed heartily, recounting the moments of the recent battle. Children crowded around the corner of the table, given fragrant honey bread. They ate while listening to the heroes tell stories with wide eyes. A group of old people sat in a small circle, softly humming ancient songs. The deep, steady singing, like small waves hitting the hearts of the listeners, lulled them back to distant memories. In the corner of the yard, a few young men were competing in an axe-throwing contest. The thump sounds rang out as the axe blade stabbed straight into the wood. Each time it hit the target, the whole group cheered loudly. The large fire burned brightly. The orange-yellow light reflected on each person's face, clearly illuminating the simple joy. The later the night, the more the mead seeped in. The noise lessened, replaced by the sound of storytelling. A warrior stood up, his horn raised high, and began to tell the story of the previous year's sea voyage, when the Viking ship sailed through a storm, waves as high as mountains. His voice was heroic, each word emphasized, making the listener nervous, as if he were drifting with the ship in the middle of a real storm. Then it was the turn of an old woman to tell an old story. The story of Fenrir, the giant wolf, and the prophecy of Ragnarok. Her voice trembled, slowly, like a song, like a lullaby. The children huddled together, eyes wide open, holding their breath to listen to every word. The lyre played again, this time slowly, lingering, as if bringing the listener's mind into the world of legend. As the wine gradually took effect, the atmosphere became more bustling. A large warrior, with shoulders as broad as a door, stepped out into the middle of the yard, raising his hand in challenge. "Who dares to compete with me?" Immediately, cheers arose. Two men stepped out. They started an arm wrestling competition right on the long wooden table. The whole crowd surrounded, shouting and cheering. The sound of hands banging on the table echoed. The whole village exploded in laughter. Without stopping, another group competed in pulling the rope. The rope was thick, tightly tied, divided into two sides. Men, women, and even children participated. The snow underfoot was turned upside down. Shouts, cheers, and laughter echoed throughout the hill. In another corner, young girls organized a game of throwing willow rings against wooden stakes. The game seemed light, but their joyful cheers spread throughout the square. All blend into a bustling sea of sound like rolling waves, making the winter night no longer cold. At midnight, when the moon was high, the priest appeared again. He carried a small torch, lit the main fire, and slowly moved around. Everyone was silent, watching each step. The priest planted the torch in the four directions: east, west, south, north. That was how they prayed for the four directions to protect the village, so that it would always be safe from war, disease, and famine. He looked up at the sky, his voice long. "This fire not only warms our bodies, but also keeps the fire in our hearts. As long as the fire burns, the Vikings will stand firm." The big fire flared up again, the light shining into each person's eyes. In that moment they felt small before the gods, but at the same time stronger, because they were never alone. When the ceremony ended, the atmosphere became cheerful again. A group of young men suddenly stood up, took out cloaks, sticks, and helmets, and dressed up as gods. A tall boy pretended to be Thor, holding a wooden hammer, pretending to dance, making all the children laugh out loud. Another boy played Loki, mischievous, teasing Thor, jumping around like a sly fox. A girl dressed in a white fur coat, played Frieja, walked gracefully, making all the old warriors laugh heartily. They performed short stories about mythology, without a script, just imagination and laughter. Who's like that? Gods and humans blended together in a night of festival without boundaries. Near dawn, the honey beer was gone, and there wasn't much grilled meat left. People began to lie down by the fire, some leaning on each other's shoulders, others resting their heads on animal skins. The big fire gradually burned down, leaving only the red embers, sparkling like thousands of tiny eyes in the darkness. The lyre played one last time. Slowly, sadly, the song reminded, tomorrow We will row again, hunt again, fight again. But tonight, let your hearts rest. The moon faded. The light of dawn appeared on the horizon. A new breeze blew, carrying the lingering smell of smoke, earth, and fire. The whole village fell asleep, peaceful after a long night filled with joy and solidarity. After the bonfire, the entire Viking village fell asleep. Animal skins were spread out on the wooden floor. The warmth of wine and fire still lingered in the air. Outside, the sea breeze whistled through the cliffs, carrying the salty air and the smell of morning dew. Warriors, young and old, men and women, everyone slept soundly, as if the gods themselves had protected them so they could rest after a day of passion. However, that night was not just an ordinary sleep. The Vikings believed that after the festivals of thanksgiving to the gods, the door between the human world and the mystical world would open in dreams, gods, ancestral spirits, or even future omens. Kul Komme, a white-haired old man, who had been a captain, lay beside the dying fire. In his dream, he saw himself back in his youth, rowing a boat in the misty sea. The waves were not fierce, but cold and endless. From afar, a giant black crow flew by, its wings fanning the wind so strongly that it parted the waves. It landed on the bow of the boat, looking at him with eyes as bright as coal fire. He understood immediately. It was Hugin, Odin's memory crow. The crow's voice rang out, not a cry, but a clear voice in his mind. "O son of the sea, tomorrow the storm will blow again, but do not be afraid. For where the waves are rough, there is also the treasure hidden." The old man woke up, cold sweat soaking his back. Although he was old and weak, his eyes were bright, as if his youth had flared up again. On the other side of the longhouse, a young warrior had just returned from battle. He was sleeping fitfully, his hands still tightly gripping the handle of his axe. In his dream, he saw himself stepping into a green field that stretched to infinity. The sky was bright, and in front of him was a large golden gate, engraved with spirals like lightning. A woman in shining armor, holding a silver spear, riding a white horse, approached. It was a Valkyrie, a female warrior of Odin. She looked at him, her eyes stern but gentle. "It is not time for you to go to Valhalla. Your axe has not yet written your fate." Then she handed him a silver bracelet engraved with ancient runes. As soon as he touched it, the bracelet glowed, and the dream disappeared. He woke with a start. His hand was still clenched, but there was no silver bracelet, only a red mark imprinted deep in his palm. A young woman, the wife of a warrior who had not returned from a long journey, fell asleep with her child in her arms. In her dream, she saw herself standing in the middle of a snow-covered forest. Everything was so quiet that she could hear her heart beating. A figure appeared, a goddess in a blue robe, her long hair flowing like the wind. It was Freg. She approached, placed her hand on her shoulder, and whispered, "Missing is a rope that binds the heart, but it is also a rope that holds hope. Be patient, the one you are waiting for will return when the flowers bloom again in this field." At the same time, the snow beneath her feet gradually melted, revealing a field of bright yellow flowers. When she woke up, tears were still rolling down her cheeks, but the anxiety in her heart had turned into a strong belief. The last person to have a strange dream that night was the priest. In his dream, he found himself entering a huge hall with an endless ceiling, pillars that seemed to touch the sky. In the center sat Odin on his throne, surrounded by two ravens, Hugin and Munin. Odin looked at him, one eye bright as fire, the other dark as the abyss. He spoke in a voice of thunder. "Time will test your people. A winter longer than all the others will come. Men and wolves will fight for every morsel of food. Unless they unite, your village will not survive." The priest knelt, his heart heavy. When he looked up, the throne had disappeared, leaving only a sky full of stars. In the middle of the sky, a streak of light suddenly shot down, like an omen. He woke up, breathing heavily. He understood that he had received a warning from the supreme god himself. The first light of dawn filtered through the cracks in the wood. The crowing of the jungle fowl woke the entire village. One by one, everyone woke up, but their eyes still held the lingering light of their strange dreams. Although each person had a different dream, they all felt that something sacred had happened last night. The priest stepped into the middle of the square and slowly spoke to the villagers. "The gods have visited in a dream. This is not an illusion. This is a reminder. Prepare yourself, a long winter is coming." The villagers were silent, then nodded in unison. They were not afraid, because they believed, with the gods by their side, the Vikings would overcome everything. After the mystical morning dream, the priest gathered the whole village in the middle of the square. The wind blew from the north, carrying an unusual cold, as Odin's prophecy had come true. He raised his ceremonial staff and spoke slowly. "Odin has warned. A winter longer than any other is coming. We must prepare not only for the cold, but also for hunger, thirst, disease, and trials from wild beasts and men." The villagers were silent, but their eyes were bright, not with fear, but with determination. Vikings had been accustomed to facing storms and death since childhood, and they knew how to turn challenges into strength. The women and children immediately set to work drying the meat. The meat of reindeer and elk was hung on wooden racks and smoked for many days. The scent of smoke permeated every fiber of the meat, preserving it for a long time and making it more flavorful. On the riverbank, old warriors and young men fished together. They spread thick nets and caught baskets of herring and cod. The fish were dried on racks, hung high to avoid wolves and foxes from lurking. In the warehouse, large jars were filled with grains, oats, and barley. Women carefully ground some of it into flour, mixed it with honey, and rolled it into hard cakes, a food that could be carried on long hunting trips. The village was like a beehive. Everyone had work to do. The murmur of work echoed throughout the valley. In the forge, the fire burned red hot. The sound of hammers pounding echoed loudly. Blacksmiths not only made swords, axes, and shields, but also forged hunting knives, iron traps, and spearheads to fight wild animals. Young warriors sat around, learning how to sharpen blades and polish leather armor. An old man stood there giving instructions, recounting his experience. The axe blade must be sharp, not only to cut the enemy, but also to chop wood. When winter lasts, wood is more precious than gold. The sound of fire crackling, the sound of hammers, mixed with the sound of the wind outside, created a song of preparation that was both urgent and powerful. To ensure enough meat, the warriors organized hunting trips that lasted for many days. They brought hunting dogs, bows, and arrows, spears, and went deep into the forest. During the trip, they faced many dangers. Hungry wolf packs. When night fell, the wolves howled. They surrounded them, their blue eyes shining in the darkness. But the Viking warriors built a ring of fire, used boughs to warn, and kept their spirits up. Giant brown bear. One day, the group encountered a bear rummaging through a beehive. A fierce battle broke out, spears stabbed, axes slashed, and hunting dogs charged. Finally, the bear fell, leaving behind precious spoils, thick fur, and dozens of pounds of meat. Sudden snowstorms. Sometimes the north wind blew, and snow covered the road. They had to dig holes in the snow, crawl in, and sleep with dogs to keep warm. The next morning, they found their way back, thanks to rune carvings on trees, signs that their ancestors had left for many generations. When they returned, the group brought back meat, animal skins, and bones to make tools. The villagers cheered and welcomed them as if they were returning heroes. Winter brought not only cold, but also the danger of pirates from other villages. At night, they built wooden watchtowers at the edge of the forest. Each warrior took turns keeping watch, his eyes fixed on the darkness. They believed that, in the long night, not only wild animals, but also humans could turn into bloodthirsty beasts. Boys in the village were taught how to use bows and arrows, how to set traps, how to listen to wolves to judge distances. Girls learned how to keep fires, prepare food, and care for the wounded. A village elder said, "When the long winter comes, the weak will not survive. But I teach you not to survive, but to live like Vikings, with your heads held high." When the work is done, the night falls, and the whole village gathers around the fire. The elders tell myths. Odin hangs from the world tree Yggdrasil to learn the secrets of runes, Thor fights the giant snake. Loki plays tricks and pays the price. These stories are both to fascinate children and for adults to remember. Each difficulty today is just a repetition of the cosmic cycle, where gods also face challenges. The sound of lyres echoes, blending with the whistling wind outside. The cold is no longer terrible, because the fire in their hearts has burned brightly. As the days passed, the ice began to cover the river. The cold wind blew, cutting like a knife. But the Viking village was ready. Dried meat and fish hung on racks. Animal skins covered the yard. Weapons gleamed. Firewood was piled up like a small wall. They looked north, where the dark clouds rolled in. No one knew how long the winter would last. But everyone knew they were prepared to the utmost. On a special evening, the priest gathered the people together again. They stood in a circle around the fire. If this winter is a test for the gods, we will not be afraid. If the blizzard tries to swallow us, we will roar. If the wolf comes knocking at our door, we will laugh and sharpen our axes. The whole village shouted in unison. Skala! The cry echoed through the mountains and forests, mingling with the north wind. Like an oath to Odin, children slept soundly, clutching their little wooden Valkyrie dolls. Adults sharpened their axes for the last time, hanging meat high in the air. The night watchmen gripped their spears, their eyes fixed on the dark forest. Snow began to fall. White flakes, soft bat cold, at first sparse, then thick, until the roofs were covered. The long winter had come, but in the Viking village, the fires still burned. The cold came without warning. That morning, when the night watchmen returned, they brought news. The river had frozen. As the already weak sun rose, the whole village saw only a cold whiteness stretching to the horizon. There was no more sound of running water. No more birds, only the wind. The wind howled long, whistling through the wooden cracks of the house, like the whisper of Hel, the goddess of the dead, signaling that the weak souls would soon be swallowed by this winter. Children huddled in thick animal skins, their eyes wide open, looking out the small windows that were almost completely covered with snow. Old people blew air into their chapped hands, sitting by the fire, still feeling the chill to the bone. Young warriors, accustomed to the sea breeze, also had to tighten their shoulders, their beards and hair frozen into white patches as hard as ice. In the longhouse, the village chief stood up, his voice hoarse and deep. Winter has truly begun. From today, we enter the test of the gods. No one said anything. Only the crackling of wood in the fireplace, like the heartbeat of the village, announced that life was still there. The sun disappeared. The day passed with only a few hours of light. Then darkness engulfed the entire Viking village. They gradually got used to living in the night. They could no longer distinguish between morning and afternoon, only the firelight in the house and the dim moonlight outside. In that endless darkness, people changed. Children cried more. Fear of unknown causes made them cry all night. Adults slept less, stayed awake more, their ears always listening for noises outside. Howling wolves, breaking branches, or sometimes sounds that did not belong to this world. The warriors became impatient. Just one wrong word could lead to a fight, because the darkness weighed down their minds, as if pressed down by the sky. An old man muttered, "As long as there is light, I know I am alive. But when the night lasts, I cannot tell if I am awake or dead." The priest had to perform a small ritual. He tapped his staff on the wooden floor and sang an ancient song. The melody was low, long, and repeated like a lullaby, to dispel the feeling of being lost in the night. The people listened, their hearts gradually calming down, but their eyes still flashed with anxiety. Time passed. The cold wind did not subside. The snow continued to fall, and the village's food storage began to dwindle. At first, everyone ate, as usual. Dried meat, salted fish, oats, all were divided into portions. But after only 2 weeks, the wooden barrels containing food were almost half empty. The storekeeper sighed, his hands shaking as he recorded the remaining amount. One morning, the village chief entered the storage. He opened the lid of a wooden jar and looked down at the bottom, only a few dried fish. His face was heavy. If we keep eating like this, we won't last through the winter. From that day on, food rations were reduced. Children were reduced to a bowl of thin porridge, made from boiling water with a little oatmeal. The elderly gave their portions to their children and grandchildren, their faces gaunt, their eyes sunken. The young warriors, who needed strength for guarding and hunting, still ate more, but only enough to keep from collapsing. At night, hunger made it difficult for everyone to sleep. The rumbling of stomachs echoed throughout the long house. A child cried, "Sajin, Ines." I dreamed of a table full of meat, full of bread, but when I touched it, it vanished like smoke. Everyone listened, their hearts growing heavier. There were young men who dared to hunt. They crossed the forest, looking for animals in the snow. But the forest was unusually quiet. Small animals had gone into their dens to hibernate. Large animals, wolves, bears, were stalking humans. A hunting party returned with only a few skinny rabbits. Everyone was as happy as if they had struck gold. But their joy was short-lived, because the meat was not enough for the whole village. Sometimes they went for 3 days without bringing back anything. Only the wolf footprints, imprinted deep in the snow, followed them, making everyone shiver. On hungry nights, sitting around the fire, the old people told old stories. Once upon a time, during the long winter, there was a man who turned into a wolf to survive. People say, when too hungry, humans and animals are no longer different. The children listened, shivering even more, clinging to their parents. The adults were silent. In their eyes, that story was not just a legend, but a warning for the present. Hunger was not enough. Cold was not enough. Darkness brought another enemy. Disease. It all started with a child. He had a fever. His whole body was burning. His eyes were red. That night, he convulsed and gasped for breath. His mother hugged him tightly, sobbing, "Please, Freya, save my child." But the prayer was lost in the darkness. The next morning, the child died. His face was pale, his eyes half closed, as if still dreaming. No one dared to cry out loud. In winter, crying is considered an invitation for wandering souls to come. People just silently put the body in a cloth, carried it out, and buried it under a thick layer of ice. The ground was so hard, they had to use axes to chop it down, etched below to open a cold hole. But that was only the beginning. A few days later, the elderly also fell ill. Then the healthy, strong people also began to cough continuously. A hoarse, heavy cough echoed throughout the long house. Someone coughed up blood, a crimson stain on the white snow, like a mark of death. The fire in the house burned brightly, but the warmth could not dispel the cold in their lungs. The sick shivered, their eyes lost focus, and then gradually fainted. The whole village was filled with a strange smell, the smell of coal smoke, mold, and the sweet smell of death. To prevent the spread of the disease, the village chief ordered that the houses with the sick be isolated. No one except the priest could enter. He entered each house, carrying a ceremonial staff and a bowl of incense made from herbs. He sang, his voice trembling, "Odin, Frigga, Balder, guide their souls in peace. Do not let the darkness hold them." But he himself knew, prayers only soothe the mind. The gods rarely interfere with human fate. At night, when the wind howled outside the door, the isolated houses echoed with a long groan. Sometimes the silence was so terrifying that a heartrending scream rang out, making the whole village shiver. A child asked softly in the darkness, "Father, why didn't God save us?" The father looked into the fire, his eyes sunken. "Maybe God is testing us." During the long winter, sickness and hunger prevailed, but people did not survive on food or medicine alone. They also survived on hope. And hope was often found in stories. At night, as the blizzard raged outside, people gathered around the fire. The flames crackled, casting shadows of gaunt faces on the wooden walls. Children sat close to their parents, ells wide open, waiting to hear old stories. An old man began to tell, his voice slow and deep. In those days, Odin climbed the world tree eagle. He hung for 9 days and 9 nights, without food or water, in search of knowledge. Finally, he saw ancient symbols, runes, appearing like light in the darkness. And from then on, Odin gave runes to humans so that we would have language, magic, and wisdom to survive. Everyone was silent. The story was like a lamp in the night, reminding that if Odin could endure 9 days hanging on the tree of suffering, then they could also overcome this long winter. Another young man spoke up, telling about Thor. Once, Thor challenged Utgard Loki, the king of the giants. Thor had to lift a cat, but the cat was no ordinary cat, but Eremungandr, the Midgard sea serpent. Thor could only lift one of the cat's legs, but that was enough to strike fear into the world. The gods laughed loudly, knowing how strong Thor was. And if we were only half as strong as Thor, we would not fall before this winter. A soft laugh rang out, Altokvik. It was like another spark being kindled. A woman told of Freya, the goddess of love and harvest. Freya has a carriage pulled by 2 giant cats. Their fur as shiny as snow. Wherever she goes, flowers and grass grow. It is believed that when winter is over, Freya will pass through our village, bringing spring, sowing new seeds. So, no matter how long the night is, the dawn will come. The children listened, their eyes sparkling. They whispered to each other that they would dream of Freya, of green meadows and shining suns. And so, in the heavy winter night, stories became spiritual food. They could not drive away the cold, but they could warm the soul. The blizzard still howled outside. The night was endless. In the numbing cold, the Viking warriors took turns keeping watch. They wore thick furs, wrapped scarves around their heads, and held torches and axes. But even the fire only lit a few steps before being swallowed by the whiteness. One night, 2 warriors returned from patrol, their faces pale, their eyes wide, as if they had just seen death. They sighed, that's in the blizzard. They saw figures staggering outside. Not one, but many. Talantin wearing torn cloaks, their hair flying in the wind. But when they called out, the figures did not answer. They just stood there, staring. When a warrior raised a torch closer, the figures vanished in the wind. From that night on, no one dared to patrol alone. They went in groups, but fear still clung to them. Some swore they heard whispers in the wind. Distant, broken voices, like the voices of the dead calling. One day, a group of night watchmen returned trembling, claiming that they saw a woman in a white dress, wheat-long hair, standing in the middle of an ice field. Her face was unclear, only her eyes were shining like 2 blue flames. As they stared, she slowly reached out her hand, as if inviting. A young warrior could not help but step forward, but his comrades held him back. At that moment a strong wind blew, and the woman's figure disappeared as if it had never existed. The village elders whispered, it could be these here guardian spirits, but it could also be Draugr, ghosts of the restless dead. Another voice trembled, or the souls of those who died of disease, coming back to seek the living. No one was sure, but from that day on, the whole village could not sleep peacefully. In their dreams, many saw familiar faces, friends, deceased relatives, appearing in the snowstorm, reaching out their hands, calling them away. Children began to cry in the middle of the night. One side, Asal, Grandpa, standing outside the window, smiling at him. But Grandpa had been buried the week before. Were the ghosts real? Or were they hallucinations of hunger, disease, and fear? No one knew. What was known was that, during that winter, the Vikings had to fight not only against nature, but also against the fear in their own souls. After the ghosts in the snow, the village had not yet recovered when the danger came. That night, the moon hid behind the clouds. The snow fell heavily. The wind howled through the roofs like a war horn. From afar, long, terrifying howls echoed. 1, 2, then dozens. Wolves. They had arrived. The winter wolves were different from the usual wolves. skinny, with bloodshot eyes, hungry to the point of madness. They smelled the scent of meat, the scent of living people, and surrounded the village like silent shadows. The guard dogs barked loudly, their hair standing on end. The guard shouted the alarm. The whole village jumped to their feet. Men quickly grabbed axes, spears, and bows. Women pulled children into corners of the house. Torches were lit, flickering in the snow wind. Then the first eyes flashed in the night, 2 cold yellow spots. A giant wolf rushed forward, fast as lightning. The guard swung his spear to meet the attack, the steel hitting the flesh with a fap sound. The wolf howled and fell. But behind it, a series of gray shadows rushed in. Roars, steel sounds, screams mixed in the snow wind. A warrior was thrown down. The wolf tore his sleeve. Blood splattered. His comrades swung their axes in time, slashing down on the beast's back. The painful howls echoed, making the pack even more ferocious. Torch smoke, flying snow, howls tore through the night. The Vikings fought like cornered animals. They knew, if the wolves rushed in, the women and children would have no chance of survival. For a moment, a brief silence fell. Then, in the white shadow, a giant wolf appeared, 1.5 times larger than usual, with silver-gray fur and red eyes. It did not rush immediately, but circled around the fence, observing, like a leader testing its prey. An old man whispered with a trembling voice, "Is that little Fenrir, Loki's little wolf, or a werewolf sent to punish me?" No one knew, only that the wolf howled long, giving orders to the pack. And the nightmare continued. The battle lasted all night. Wolf corpses lay everywhere, blood staining the white snow. But in return, the villagers also fell. Some warriors were hit by the wolf's fangs, unable to get up. Some young men were seriously injured, only able to look at their wives and children one last time before dying. At dawn, when the weak sun appeared, the last wolf pack retreated. The howling gradually faded away, melting into the icy forest. The village was completely silent, except for the gasps and groans of the wounded, and the cold wind seeping through every crack. The Vikings looked at each other, tired, exhausted, but still standing. They knew that, tonight, they had survived, but winter was still long, and the danger was not over. After the battle with the wolves, the village fell into an eerie silence. The snow was thicker. The wind was howling more fiercely. The fallen had not yet been buried. The bodies were wrapped in coarse cloth, neatly stacked in the corner of the warehouse, waiting for the weather to calm down before digging graves. Food was almost exhausted. Dried meat, grain, salted fish. There was only enough left for another week. Hunters could not go out into the forest, because the blizzard blocked all paths. Wolves still prowled, ready to tear apart anyone who dared to leave the fence. A meeting was held in the big house. The fire burned low, casting light on the tired, haggard faces of each person. The village chief, his voice hoarse from cold and lack of sleep, slowly said, "If we divide equally, the whole village will starve before the end of winter. I need another option." The whole room was silent. Everyone knew what he wanted to say, but no one dared to say it. After a long while, the priest stood up. He raised his ceremonial staff, his voice deep and resonant. The ancestors taught that when death is near, one person who falls can save 100 who stand firm. The gods will remember that sacrifice and bless those who survive. The words fell like stones in everyone's hearts. A harsh truth. To save the whole village, someone must sacrifice. That night, no one could sleep. In the wooden houses, the cries of hungry children, the sighs of old people, and the whispers of prayers echoed everywhere. Then, the next morning, a man stood up. It was Eirik, the oldest warrior in the village, his hair already white, his body emaciated from days of hunger and thirst. He put on an old fur coat, leaned on a stick, and entered the synagogue. "I have lived long enough," he said hoarsely, but clearly. "I have gone through many winters and many battles, but not the children. If one life can be exchanged for many, Then take my life." No one could hold back their tears. The young woman burst into tears, kneeling down to beg. "No, Aidit, you are the one who taught my son to wield an axe. You are the one who keeps the fire for this whole village. It cannot be." But Eirik smiled, a strangely calm smile. "Death comes eventually. If I had to choose, I would like my death to have meaning." He stepped out into the snowy courtyard, raised his head to look at the gray sky. The villagers gathered around, silent. The priest began to pray, calling on the names of Odin, Thor, and Freya, asking to receive the old warrior's soul. It is said that at that moment, the wind suddenly stopped for a moment. The weak sun emerged from behind the clouds, shining on Eirik like a last ray of light. The whole village knelt down, crying and praying, taken out that, thanks to this sacrifice, they would be able to hold out a little longer. But deep down, everyone understood. Winter was not over, and perhaps other sacrifices lie ahead. After Eirik's voluntary death, the whole village fell silent. Everyone felt a deep sadness, but at the same time, a strange power spread. His sacrifice had given everyone strength. However, just a day later, strange things began to happen. One, the strange crow appears. One gray morning, when the snow had just stopped falling, a boy shouted loudly, "Crow! Crow is coming!" In the sky, a huge black crow spread its wings, circled 3 times over the roof of the synagogue, then landed on a wooden pillar in the middle of the courtyard. Its eyes were bright, as if piercing every soul. The old man whispered, "That is Hugin or Munin, Odin's crow. If the god sends crows, it means he is watching us." The crow cawed hoarsely. Tin flew Hawaii, leaving a heavy silence. It was believed to be a warning. The gods knew of Eirik's sacrifice and were testing them. That night, many people in the village had the same dream. They saw an endless green field, a brilliant summer, ripe grain, and deer running freely. But in the midst of that beautiful scene, suddenly a thunderclap rang out, and the sky turned black. A giant snake, Jahamangandor, son of Lokis, slithered across the field, swallowing the light. The dreamers woke up with a start, cold sweat running down their backs. They told the story, and the priest explained, "It is a sign of Ragnarok. The end of the world will come, but not now. The gods are reminding us, darkness can swallow the light, but before that day comes, humanity must be strong." 3. The Northern Lights in the snowstorm. A few days later, in the midst of a howling snowstorm, the sky suddenly lit up with a blue-purple light. The aurora borealis appeared, winding like magical silk. The villagers rushed out, looking up in amazement. Someone whispered, "That's the Bifrost rainbow. The gods are opening their gates, looking down on the world." Children shouted, their eyes sparkling, and adults clasped hands. In that moment, fear seemed to vanish, replaced by hope. The gods had not abandoned them. During the ceremony, the priest poured goat blood on the sacred stone, closed his eyes, and recited the prophecy. "East, a long, harsh winter. I see the blizzard engulfing the forest, and the wolves returning. But I also see a small fire, never extinguished. If we can keep that fire, the village will survive. But to keep it, we will need more blood." The villagers shuddered at the sound. No one knew what that fire was. Was it a real fire, or was it their will? Only one thing was certain. The road ahead was still full of loss. That night, everyone hugged each other and sat around the fire. The wind howled outside, but in their hearts, a new faith flashed. The gods were still watching. Take note that, though hungry and scared, they were not alone. And the sacrifice was not over yet. The winter seemed to last forever. Snowstorm after snowstorm, the wind howled all night. The cold cut like 1,000 knives. The villagers had lost count of how many days had passed. Food was only a few withered radishes and a few pieces of dried meat. There were many sick people. Hoarse coughs echoed everywhere. Children slept soundly, so thin that only their bright eyes shone like small flames. On that last night, the whole village gathered in the meeting house. The fire in the kitchen burned brightly. Weak but warm, no one said much. They just sat still, holding each other's hands, listening to the wind outside, like the howling of a demon. Suddenly, in the roar of the storm, a sound like the beating of a war drum rang out slow, deep, echoing from afar. Everyone looked up, eyes filled with fear and hope. Someone whispered, "That is the drumbeat of the Einherjar, the immortal warriors gathering in Valhalla." The fire in the hearth suddenly flared up fiercely, illuminating the whole house. The village chief stood up, his voice hoarse but determined. "If this is our last night, we will not die in fear. We will go out as warriors, as Vikings." The shout echoed throughout the house, drowning out the storm. That night, when fatigue had drained their strength, each of the villagers fell asleep, and all shared a strange dream. They saw a green meadow, the sky bright. At the end of the meadow were the gates of Valhalla, huge golden doors, wide open. Odin sat on his throne, one eye shining, Gungnir in his hand. Beside him stood the Valkyrie, riding a white horse, beckoning them to enter. The fallen Eirik, the fallen warriors, those who died of disease, of hunger, were all waiting there, smiling, holding out their hands. Children shouted, running to hug their loved ones. The elderly shed tears, but their smiles were still radiant. They no longer felt cold, no longer in pain. When the first rays of spring sun shone down, the last snowstorm dissipated. A gentle light covered the icy roof. In the synagogue, many people breathed their last in that beautiful dream. They passed away peacefully, still smiling as if they were seeing Valhalla. The survivors woke up, their faces haggard but their eyes shining. They knew winter was behind them. The village chief rekindled the fire on the altar, whispering, "Eirik and all the souls who have fallen, you have not been in vain. We will continue to live, to tell this story, so that future generations will remember. Even in the longest winter, the fire in the hearts of Vikings never goes out." And so, the story ends. From a small village in the cold snow, they have overcome hunger, disease, wolves, ghosts, with solidarity, with sacrifice, and with faith in the gods. Even though death is near, they still hold their heads high, because for Vikings, death is not the end, but the beginning of immortal glory in Valhalla. The snow began to melt. From the icy roofs, tiny drops of water fell, sparkling like crystal. The river, which had been covered in ice, cracked, making a crackling sound that echoed like the silent roar of spring. The survivors of the village stepped out, their eyes filled with astonishment. For months, they had only seen endless white. Now the ground was gradually revealing a dark, brown, damp color, the musty smell of earth permeating the air. To them, it was the sweetest scent of life. However, joy was mixed with pain. They passed by the now empty houses, where there used to be laughter. Now there was only silence. They came to the cemetery on the hill, looking at the rows of earthen graves covered with stones and dry branches. Those who had fallen during the long winter had now become part of the earth, waiting to be told in the stories passed down through generations. The village chief stuck his spear into the ground, his head bowed low. His voice was trembling but firm. "We have lost many, but they did not die in vain. Thanks to their sacrifice, we have seen this spring. Let us engrave their names in our memory, so that no one will be forgotten." The villagers were silent. Only the spring wind blew softly, like the whispers of departed souls. Then, with the remaining strength, they began to rebuild. Warriors cleared the snow from the yard, rebuilt the ruined wooden fence. Women gathered the few seeds, sowing them in the still cold, damp soil. Children, thin but with eyes sparkling with hope, ran around collecting firewood, lighting the fire. At night, the fire burned brighter than ever. There was no more crying, only stories to remember. They talked about Eirik, the warrior who sacrificed his life. They talked about the mothers and fathers who held their children in the cold. And they talked about dreams of Valhalla, where they believed the fallen were smiling at them. Day after day, The snow melted. On the wet ground, the first green shoots emerged, small but stubborn, breaking through the cold soil. The villagers saw, and the whole crowd burst into tears. Not tears of pain, but because for the first time since winter, they truly believed life had returned. One evening, the village chief stood on a high hill, looking across the village and the distant forest. The red sunlight covered the roofs, the faces of the survivors. He spoke loudly, letting the wind carry his words far away. We have gone through the longest winter. Now is the time to start a new beginning. Despite the losses, we are still alive. And as long as we are alive, we will rebuild everything. The shout echoed, echoing through the mountains and forests, as if affirming that, from here on, their history would continue, not collapse. That night, when they looked up at the sky, they saw a faint aurora, like a dancing blue-violet corytine. People believed it was a sign that the gods had heard their prayers. And so, from the ashes of a deadly winter, a new chapter of life began. Night fell. After many long months, the sky was clear and starry. Silver moonlight bathed the wooden roofs. The river had just cleared of ice, and the distant forests were tinged with melted snow. The small village was silent, as if breathing a new breath. The breath of life, newly revived. By the fire, the elders sat recounting what had passed. They told of the long winter, of the dark, sunless nights, of the howling of wolves, of ghosts in the snow. They spoke of sacrifice, of names never to be forgotten. And then, they added, that far away on the dome of Valhalla, the warriors, their fallen relatives, were still raising cups of mead, singing, and watching. The children, their eyes clear, sat around, listening attentively. For them, the winter sufferings were no longer a fear, but a story to be remembered. They believed that their fathers had fought not only with swords and spears, but with their will and heart. The village chief stood up, holding the torch high. The flickering flame reflected in everyone's eyes. His voice echoed, "We are alive. We carry the oath in our hearts. We carry the names of the dead in our hearts. From this day forward, their stories will follow us, not only in this life, but in the next." The whole village shouted in unison, the sound echoing into the mountains and forests. It was as if at that moment, amidst the sound of the wind, somewhere there was an answer, singing, drums, a call from Valhalla. Spring was approaching. New shoots were sprouting everywhere. Flocks of birds were returning from their long flights. The river was rushing, carrying away the ice, and in every house, laughter was heard again, no longer trembling, but strong, as if affirming that they had won, even at the cost of loss. The story of a long winter ended here. But in truth, it never ended. It only became a legend, passed down from generation to generation, like a flame that never goes out. The Vikings believed that as long as their names were known, their spirits lived on. And tonight, under the stars, as the fires burned in the village grounds, surely in Valhalla, they were smiling, raising their cups, and singing to Odin, Thor, Freya. And so, from Valhalla to the next, the story continues. Not with swords, not with shields, but with the memories, the blood, and the hearts of the living.